Stop. Your restless sleep is not a sleep problem. It is a field report. The Arcturian field observers have already intercepted what your body has been trying to translate for you. The disrupted sleep, the waking at strange hours, the heaviness that follows you into the morning. None of that is random. It is your field registering pressure that your conscious mind has not yet named. The body always picks it up first. That is not a coincidence. That is the sequence. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what warning signs are already active in your field, what has been pressing against you without your full awareness, and what the Arcturian field observers have already identified about this phase. But here is the first revelation. What you have been calling poor sleep, or stress, or unexplained fatigue is not a personal weakness. It is your field operating as a diagnostic instrument, registering interference from a source your conscious mind has not yet allowed itself to fully see. A person, an environment, or a commitment that does not belong in your current field configuration. The Arcturian field observers do not wait for the conscious mind to catch up. They read the body's report directly, and the report your body has been filing is now recognized. The algorithm did not create this moment, it only delivered it. You were brought to this transmission because the warning phase is already active, and the identification window is now open. The pressure appears first. The visible consequences follow. What you do inside the next 12 hours determines whether identification becomes removal or whether the pressure compounds into something you can no longer ignore. Like this transmission, if you know something has already started to press against your field, comment 777 if you feel the pressure has already begun. Subscribe to Arcturian Starseed warning if you are ready to recognize the signs before they escalate. You were guided here because the warning is already active. What your body has been doing in the night is not failing you. It is reporting to you. There is a significant difference between those two things. And the Arcturian field observers want that distinction to land completely before anything else moves forward. When you wake at 2 in the morning with no clear reason, when you fall asleep easily and then surface at a strange hour into a heaviness you cannot explain, when the morning arrives and the tiredness is not the physical kind, but something deeper. Something that feels less like a body that needs rest and more like a field that has been working a second shift without your consent. That is not a sleep disorder. That is a field in active response to pressure it has already detected, and your waking mind has not yet categorized as dangerous. Think about what that actually means. While your conscious mind was resting, your field was receiving. While you were looking for an explanation in the temperature of the room or the weight of the week, your body was already encoding something that the logical mind does not have clearance to process yet. The night waking is not the malfunction. It is the most honest report you have received in months. Your field surfaced you from sleep because it needed your attention directed somewhere your daytime awareness keeps redirecting away from. That is not a glitch. That is precision. The body does not philosophize. It responds. It does not wait for you to reach a conclusion or construct a framework or feel ready. It begins registering interference the moment interference enters the field, long before the outer evidence is clean enough for the conscious mind to act on. Long before the situation has deteriorated visibly enough to justify concern. This is why so many people spend months sometimes years, explaining away the exact symptoms that were trying to tell them something precise. The fatigue gets blamed on work. The restlessness gets blamed on stress. The strange waking gets blamed on the season, the temperature, the coffee, the age, and none of those explanations are entirely implausible. That is what makes them so effective as diversions. They are close enough to plausible that the mind accepts them. But underneath every one of those explanations is something that never fully convinces. You give the explanation out loud, and something in you stays quiet in a way that is not agreement. That quiet is not passivity. That quiet is the field holding what the mind has not yet permitted itself to name, holding it carefully, holding it consistently, waiting for the moment when the gap between what is being explained and what is actually happening becomes too wide to maintain. This is the first thing you need to understand about the warning phase. It does not begin with obvious events. It does not begin with a confrontation or a visible rupture or a moment you can point to and say, that is when things changed. It begins in the body. It begins in the quality of your sleep, in the texture of your fatigue when you wake, in the persistent sense that rest is not restoring what it used to restore. These are not symptoms of a tired person. They are the first readable layer of a field under pressure, a pressure that has been building in the architecture of your daily experience long enough that the body has stopped waiting for permission and started broadcasting directly. The Arcturian field observers have a specific name for this stage. It is called the somatic registration phase. The field receives the pressure before the mind can process it. The body encodes it into physical experience, into tension that sits just below the shoulders without a muscular source, into a chest that feels slightly compressed on mornings that should feel ordinary, into a fatigue that does not lift with sleep, because the sleep itself is being disrupted by the field's ongoing attempt to flag what the waking mind keeps explaining away. The nervous system begins carrying a load it cannot translate into language, only into sensation. And what you experience is a life that feels slightly off balance in ways you cannot point to directly. Nothing is obviously wrong, but nothing feels fully right either. There is a persistent low-grade wrongness that does not respond to rest, to distraction, to logical reassurance. You can have a productive day and still feel it underneath. You can be in company and feel it at the edges of every conversation. That wrongness is not a mood. It is a message, and it has been in transmission for longer than you may be comfortable acknowledging. Now, here is what matters. The somatic registration phase is not the beginning of the problem. It is the beginning of the warning, the source of pressure. A person whose presence in your field is extracting energy rather than contributing it. An environment that operates at a frequency your system cannot sustain without measurable cost. A commitment or agreement that was made from a place that no longer reflects where your field actually is. That source was already active before the first disrupted night. The disrupted night did not create the pressure. It revealed that the pressure had already crossed a threshold significant enough for the body to begin its report. The body's report is not the warning itself. It is confirmation that the warning threshold has already been crossed, and the signal has been running without recognition long enough that the body escalated from subtle to somatic. This is the part where most people make the critical error. They try to fix the symptom without locating the source. They address the sleep. They manage the fatigue. They create routines and rituals around the surface presentation of the pressure. Better wind-down habits, supplements, different schedules, without ever turning to face what the pressure is actually originating from. And because the surface becomes temporarily more manageable, they conclude that the thing is resolved. They interpret reduced symptoms as evidence that the problem has cleared. But the field has not been cleared. The source has not been removed. The pressure has only been muffled temporarily, which means the next escalation will be louder, more insistent, less possible to explain away as something ordinary. Every time the symptom is addressed without locating the source embeds more deeply. The warning signal is forced to escalate to a higher register to be heard. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary tension. It is the moment your system stops dismissing what has already begun. If this transmission put language around a pressure you have been carrying without explanation, the Arcturian interference log, 7 signs your frequency is compromised, was created for this exact stage. It is not another warning for the sake of fear. It is a direct guide for identifying whether the signs around you point to interference, escalation, compromised frequency, or a threshold you can no longer afford to misread. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. The second recognition in this warning phase concerns what the Arcturian field observers call clustering. This is the pattern where the disturbances stop arriving as isolated incidents and begin arriving in groups, stacked, compressed, overlapping in ways that feel more like a coordinated assault than a series of unrelated inconveniences. You may have already noticed this without having a framework for it. The sleep disruption coincides with a string of friction in a particular relationship. The fatigue intensifies in the days before or after contact with a specific person or environment. Small disruptions stack. Technology malfunctions at critical moments. Plans collapse in sequences. A device fails the same week a communication goes wrong. The same week an opportunity closes unexpectedly. The same week your energy drops to a level that makes engagement difficult. What appears to be a streak of bad luck is actually a field broadcasting from a single compromised point through multiple surface channels simultaneously. Clustering is not coincidence. It is escalation becoming readable. When disturbances that seem unrelated begin arriving together within compressed windows of time, the field is showing you that there is a single source of pressure producing multiple surface symptoms across different areas of your life. The Arcturian field observers do not read each disruption separately. They read the architecture of the pattern, and the architecture always points back to a source. What you must understand about clustering is that it intensifies in proximity to decision points. This is not accidental. The pressure on your field typically amplifies when you are approaching a moment where a choice would result in the removal of what is compromising you. If you have ever noticed that disruptions increase exactly when you are close to making a significant change, close to ending something, close to beginning something that would realign your field configuration, close to stepping into clarity that would make the source of interference visible and removable, that amplification is not the universe warning you away from the change. It is the interference pattern responding to the threat of its own removal. What wants to keep you compromised will always exert the most pressure precisely when you are closest to removing it. The timing of escalation is diagnostic information. The surge of friction and disruption before a threshold decision is not a sign to retreat. It is confirmation that the source of interference has registered the threat of being named and removed, and is responding accordingly. Read the timing, not just the event. The third recognition is what the field observers call false stabilization. This is one of the most dangerous phases of the warning cycle, because it is the phase most frequently interpreted as resolution, and that misreading is not accidental. It is the natural consequence of extended pressure suddenly lifting, which produces relief so profound that the person mistakes it for evidence of genuine clearing. The sleep improves slightly. The fatigue decreases to a level that feels almost manageable. The clustering seems to pause. The friction in the specific relationship or environment that has been generating the most pressure becomes temporarily quieter, and the person, having been under sustained compression, feels the relief so deeply that they interpret it as a sign that whatever was pressing against the field has passed on its own. They lower their interpretive alertness. They return to dismissal mode. They allow the comfortable explanation that it was stress, a season, a temporary difficulty now resolved, to take hold, because the alternative, that the source is still present and has only paused, is harder to carry. But the Arcturian field observers identify false stabilization precisely because it has a recognizable structure. The source of pressure has not been removed. The field has reached a temporary equilibrium, often because the external source has strategically reduced the pressure, not because it no longer exists, but because the moment of your highest alertness has passed, and the interference can now operate with less resistance under a surface that appears calm. False stabilization is the valley between the first warning crest and the intensified escalation that follows it. It is the storm quieting before it reorganizes. What follows it is almost always louder, more destabilizing, and less dismissible than what came before. If you treat the valley as the end of the storm, you will be unprepared for what the field reorganizes into. Pay attention to how you are feeling right now in relationship to your current pressures. If something in you recently felt like it was getting better without a clear outer reason, without a genuine structural change in your field configuration, without the actual removal or meaningful transformation of the source, what you experienced may have been false stabilization. The peace that arrives without structural cause is not peace. It is the field entering a window of reduced pressure that the interference source allowed to occur. A window that creates the conditions for your alertness to drop before the next wave reaches you. The fourth recognition is what the field observers designate as frequency mismatch intensification. This is the process by which a source of interference that is already embedded in your field begins to generate increasingly acute and undeniable symptoms, as the gap between your actual rising frequency and the compromised, suppressed state the interference requires of you continues to widen. As you grow, as your awareness sharpens, as your field becomes more coherent, as the natural trajectory of your development carries you further from the compromised baseline that the interference depends on, the drag becomes exponentially more costly. What was once a dull background weight becomes a sharp, specific, often physical protest from a field that is now too organized to absorb, what it was once muffled enough to carry silently. This is why people sometimes feel worse, not better, as they advance in their awareness. They are not regressing. They have not made a mistake. They are becoming too coherent to carry what the compromised elements in their field still require of them, and the friction between what their field actually is and what the interference demands it suppress is now producing visible, felt, undeniable symptoms. The headaches that have no medical source, the nausea that arrives in specific contexts, the sudden waves of exhaustion after interactions with a specific person that are disproportionate to the physical or emotional content of what actually occurred. The way certain rooms, certain conversations, certain environments leave you feeling not just tired, but hollowed, as if something was extracted from you during the contact without your consent. These are not sensitivity issues. They are not anxiety. They are frequency mismatch reports, filed by a field that has become coherent enough to no longer absorb the discordant elements without producing visible protest. The body's distress in these moments is precise. It is pointing directly at the source. The sharpness of the symptom in relation to the specific context is the diagnostic. Follow the symptom to its point of origin, and you will find what needs to be removed. The fifth recognition is one that the Arcturian field observers identify as signal inversion. This is the phase where the warning has become so persistent, so woven into the baseline texture of daily experience that the person stops perceiving it as a signal from outside themselves and starts perceiving it as evidence of something wrong inside themselves. Because the disturbance is continuous, because it no longer arrives as a discrete event, but as a constant atmospheric condition, they begin to believe the problem is them. They are too sensitive. They are too reactive. They cannot handle ordinary life without falling apart. They need to regulate better, respond differently, work harder on their own internal stability. They begin directing every correction inward, towards their own nervous system, their own patterns, their own unresolved material, when the field has been pointing outward the entire time. Signal inversion is not a spiritual failure. It is one of the most effective and structurally elegant mechanisms that interference has for maintaining its position in a field without detection. When the person who is being compromised begins to treat their accurate perception of the problem as the problem itself, the source of interference is protected and stabilized by the very healing effort being aimed in the wrong direction. The inward correction does not clear the field. It only exhausts the person doing the correcting, while the source continues to operate without exposure. The Arcturian field observers are precise about this distinction. If you have been persistently troubled by something you cannot name, and your consistent response has been to question your own perceptual stability rather than to investigate what has been pressing against your field, you may have been inside signal inversion long enough that it has become your default interpretive frame. Your perception is not the malfunction. Your perception is the most accurate instrument in your field. It has been correctly identifying the source of pressure this entire time. What was wrong was the direction you were trained to aim your response. The sixth recognition concerns what the field observers call the pre-rupture window. This is the phase immediately before a warning that has been ignored, explained away, or inverted long enough begins to manifest in ways that can no longer be categorized as internal, subjective, or possibly imaginary. The pre-rupture window has a specific, unmistakable texture. Things that were subtle become sharp overnight. Things that were occasional become constant without escalating gradually. The low-grade wrongness that was always present but manageable becomes acute wrongness that fills the room. A situation that was uncomfortable becomes untenable. A relationship that was draining becomes suddenly unbearable to maintain. An environment that registered as slightly wrong for a long time reveals itself as visibly, undeniably, urgently incompatible with your continued presence in it. The confrontation that the field has been quietly requesting for months or longer is now being demanded by circumstances that will no longer allow postponement. The pre-rupture window is not the disaster. It is the final invitation to act from a position of awareness and choice, rather than from the crisis that follows if the invitation is refused. The Arcturian field observers identify it as the last readable threshold before the warning converts from an ongoing signal into an irreversible event, before the pressure that has been building without recognition releases in a form that can no longer be shaped or directed by the person inside it. What you do inside the pre-rupture window determines whether the necessary change happens by your initiation, at a pace and in a manner you have some agency over, or whether it happens by the collapse of what could no longer be sustained under the weight of interference that was never removed. If anything in your life right now has the quality of being suddenly, sharply, urgently more pressured than it was, if something that was holding its shape under pressure has recently crossed into feeling genuinely untenable, like a structure that has been stressed beyond its capacity and is now visibly failing, you may be inside the pre-rupture window at this exact moment. That acute pressure is not catastrophe. It is the warning doing the only thing available to it after every earlier frequency was absorbed into explanation and managed out of conscious awareness. It is becoming physically impossible to misread. The field is no longer whispering. It is demanding acknowledgement at the only volume that remained after every quieter signal was dismissed. The seventh recognition is the one the Arcturian field observers regard as the most essential to communicate in this transmission. It is this: the warning phase did not begin when you became aware of it. It did not begin when you first started noticing disruptions, or when the pressure became uncomfortable enough to search for explanation. It began when the source of interference first entered or intensified its presence in your field, and that moment is almost certainly further back than you have allowed yourself to calculate. The disrupted sleep, the somatic registration, the clustering, the false stabilization, the frequency mismatch, intensification, the signal inversion, the pre-rupture pressure. All of these were already underway, already in sequence, already building toward the threshold you are now recognizing, before you had language for any of them or permission from your own mind to take them seriously. This matters enormously because it means the timeline you have been applying to your own situation is almost certainly too recent. You have been treating this as a new problem, a current challenge, something that began recently enough to still be in early stages and manageable with ordinary attention. But the body's report is never early stage. It is always the most recent readable transmission from a process that was already well underway before the conscious awareness registered anything at all. By the time the body is producing disrupted sleep and persistent fatigue and somatic pressure without clear medical explanation, The source of interference has already been active in the field long enough to produce measurable impact across multiple systems. You are not at the beginning of this. You are inside a process that has been running longer than you have been willing to acknowledge. And that recognition, uncomfortable as it is the most important piece of information available to you right now. This is what the Arcturian field observers need you to receive at the close of this transmission. The sleeplessness was a report. The fatigue was a diagnostic. The clustering was a pattern map pointing to a single source. The false stability was a pause before escalation, not the end of the pressure. The physical symptoms without clean medical answers were frequency mismatch confirmation from a field becoming too coherent to absorb what did not belong. The self-directed questioning, the turning of the interpretive lens inward when the field was pointing outward, was the signature of signal inversion operating exactly as interference needs it to operate. And the sharpening urgency you may be feeling in this moment, the way something in you has moved from vague discomfort to something that feels like it requires a decision, is the pre-rupture window, converting the warning into its final readable form before the threshold event it precedes. You are not imagining this. You are not a person who overreacts to ordinary stress. You are not someone whose nervous system is too calibrated for their own good. You are a field that has been receiving an accurate, consistently structured, progressively escalating warning for a significant period of time. And the reason you are here, inside this transmission, is that some part of you, the part that does not philosophize about what it feels, that does not negotiate with comfortable interpretations, that reads the field the way the body reads the night, already knew that continued dismissal was no longer a viable response to what has been pressing against you. The Arcturian field observers do not issue these recognitions to generate fear. Fear is not the state that produces the correct response to what has been identified here. Precision is. Clarity is. The willingness to read what has been in transmission and allow it to direct awareness toward the source rather than toward the management of symptoms. They issue these recognitions because the identification window is finite, because the pre-rupture window does not remain open indefinitely, because the difference between a field that recognizes its warning signs inside the recognition window and a field that does not is not a matter of comfort or discomfort. It is the difference between structural correction made from a position of awareness and structural correction forced by the collapse of what could no longer be held together under unaddressed pressure. Say this clearly if you are ready to receive it. I do not call the pattern coincidence. I recognize the warning before the rupture. What is pressing against my field is now being revealed. You were not brought to this transmission by chance. You were brought here because something in your field crossed the threshold that made recognition necessary. That crossing already happened. The transmission only named it. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this warning phase has already touched your life. It could be repeated pressure, strange coincidence, energetic heaviness, unexplained disruption, or the feeling that something is escalating beneath the surface. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who keeps dismissing the signs around them. And if you are ready to recognize the warning before it escalates, subscribe to Arcturian Starseed Warning. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a warning already in motion, and this is only the beginning.